Can you imagine caring for your granddaughter day and night, with all the love in the world, only to have the door shut in your face on the day of her party with the cruelest excuse? It's family only? That's what happened to me, and what I discovered afterward changed my life forever. Because behind that humiliation wasn't just contempt. There were years of abuse, manipulation, and a son who saw me more as an ATM than as a mother. But the day came when I said, enough. And with that one word, I got back my dignity, my peace, and even the respect of my family. Stay with me, because in this true story, you're going to see how a woman, even after 60, can transform pain into strength. Subscribe right now and hit the notification bell, because what I'm about to tell you might open your eyes and change your life, too. I walked into the apartment building holding a gift bag that smelled like new paper and excitement. I had chosen a yellow dress for Valentina because the color looked so beautiful on her, like sunshine. I was smiling, my heart racing like a runaway train. My phone buzzed right before I could ring the bell. The text from my daughter-in-law shined like a knife. The party is family only. I read it twice, just in case my eyes were mistaken. The word family hit me in the chest like a slamming door. I stood frozen in the hallway, the gift suddenly as heavy as a brick. I took a deep breath to keep from making a scene. I'm not a woman who makes scenes. I'm a woman of silences. But inside, my face was burning, like when a pot of soup boils over. I thought about the entire year I had spent taking care of my granddaughter, without watching the clock, without complaining. I thought about the mornings of getting her into her school clothes and fixing her braids, about the bedtime stories. If that's not family, then what am I to them? A neighbor came out with her trash and looked at me curiously. I dropped my gaze, put my phone away, and walked home slowly. I remembered the night she had a fever, when I sat up with her, wiping her forehead with cool washcloths. I remembered the Saturdays of homework and Play-Doh stuck to the table, the freshly squeezed orange juice I patiently made for her colds. The shots at the doctor's office, Valentina's fear, her hand squeezing mine, the tickets for the school play that I paid for without saying a word, the breakfasts at 6 in the morning, with muffins and little laughs. Every picture I took for her mom, so she wouldn't miss anything. How I felt useful, like a lamp kept on in the night. I'm not short on money, thank God, and my years of work. Ever since I was widowed, I learned to budget, to not ask for favors. That's why I bought the dress gladly, and I baked the vanilla cake myself. I tied it with a beautiful ribbon, the kind you save for special occasions. I wanted to get there early, to help serve, to see her little face when she blew out the candles. I dreamed of a photo of the 3 generations, like the ones you frame in the living room. But the screen told me I wasn't wanted, and that feeling, of being an extra, bit into my soul without warning. My daughter-in-law never uses emojis with me. She always writes harshly. Family only. No hello, no please, like a rule nailed to the wall. My son, on the other hand, sends quick voice messages as if time is chasing him. That afternoon, neither of them called to explain. I looked at the gift and thought about leaving it with the doorman, but I was ashamed to offer affection that was only halfway received. I sat for a moment on a park bench, trying to gather my thoughts. The cherry trees were shedding their blossoms, and still I felt stripped bare. I walked through my Lincoln Park neighborhood with the steady pace of an older woman who knows every crack in the sidewalk. The hot dog vendor offered me one with everything, and I shook my head. A boy rode by on his bicycle, and he reminded me of my son when he was 8. How quickly they grow up, and how easily they forget where they came from. The sun was setting between the buildings, and I saw myself in every window. A woman who cares, who serves, who stays quiet so as not to be a bother. I promised myself I wouldn't cry on the street, as if that gave me some control. But the lump in my throat stayed with me all the way to my apartment door. I unlocked it, left my keys in the small ceramic dish my friend Carol gave me. I put the cake on the table. The house smelled like cinnamon and fresh baking. I took out 2 plates out of habit, even though there would be no visitors today. I poured myself a pot of coffee and pulled up the chair where Valentina always sits. I stared at the empty space as if her laughter were still there. I took out my blue-covered notebook and began to write what I cannot say. "It hurts to be called an outsider," I wrote in big letters. The pencil trembled a bit, but it didn't break. At first, I blamed myself for everything, the way mothers trained to concede always do. Maybe I'm too intense. Maybe I take up too much space, I told myself quietly. I remembered Arthur, my late husband, telling me to make them respect me. He was always gentle but firm, like a warm hand that guides without pushing. I postponed my own character for the sake of peace, and that peace turned into silence. The silence over the years became a habit, and the habit, I understand now, made them believe I could put up with anything. No, I can't put up with anything, I thought for the first time in a long time. There were signs, ones I chose to ignore to avoid a fight. The time they asked me to arrive early and leave early so I wouldn't be in the way of the photos. The time they moved me to a different table because the cousins are bringing their kids. The time they left me out of the family group chat with the excuse of not enough space. They told me not to take it personally, as if my love was just merchandise. I would smile and swallow just to see my granddaughter happy, how cheap affection becomes when you don't respect yourself. I wrote that line in my notebook, and I underlined it twice. Night fell early, as if the day wanted to hide, too. I washed the dishes, though none were dirty, just out of the habit of tidying up. I sat by the phone not to wait, but to finish my letter. Then the table vibrated with a number I've known since he was a boy. My son. I took a deep breath. I wiped my tears with the back of my hand. I answered the way a mother who doesn't want to fight answers. "What's wrong, honey?" I said, as if nothing was broken. He cleared his throat and spoke quickly, with that tone he uses when a favor is coming. "Mom, could you help us with a little money for the party hall? Everything hit us at once. You know, the rent, the school tuition, the decorations." I looked at the untouched cake, and I felt the sugar rise to my eyes. He didn't mention his wife's text. He said nothing about family. Just the money, as if I were the same old credit card with no limit. He asked me for help just this one time, a phrase I already know by heart. And I, for the first time, didn't know what to answer him right away. I told him to give me the night to think about it, and we hung up with a silence at the end. I turned off the living room light and sat in the dark, listening to my own heart. "I'm not cruel, but I'm not invisible either," I repeated to myself like a prayer. I put the gift in the closet and covered the cake in case I shared it with someone tomorrow. I looked at the notebook and wrote one last sentence. "Tomorrow, I choose myself." I didn't sleep well, but I woke up different, with a clarity that is frightening. In the kitchen, the coffee seemed stronger than other days, and with the first sip, I knew what I was going to say, even though I hadn't told them yet. Ever since I ended that call with my son, a single question haunted me like an echo in an empty room. Am I not family? I, who watched Valentina take her first steps, who heard her babble her first words. I, who cared for her with my tired but happy hands, like someone protecting a treasure. That family only was a slap without a hand, but it left a mark on my heart. I walked through my apartment like a shadow, wondering at what point I had become a stranger. It hurt to imagine the party, full of balloons and laughter, without me. It hurt more to think that my place had been given to someone less close, and the word grandmother seemed to carry no weight in their world anymore. I remembered every dawn I woke up before the Sunday, I'd put a sweater on over my bathrobe and rush to make breakfast. A glass of warm milk, toast with butter, fruit cut with care. Sometimes Valentina didn't want to go to school, and I would convince her with made-up stories. I'd tell her there were hidden stars in the classroom waiting for her to find them, and she would laugh, and eventually we'd leave holding hands. Now, that same hand was denied to me on her most special day. What greater title is there than grandmother? And still they snatch it away from me. I don't consider myself a fragile woman. Quite the opposite. I have lived through losses, betrayals, and loneliness that few could bear. But nothing hurts more than the contempt of your own, because there is no defense against it. It's as if the arrow was shot from inside your own chest. I thought, maybe I'm exaggerating, maybe it was just a poor choice of words. But my daughter-in-law's coldness reminded me that no, it was not an accident. It was an intention to push me aside, to put me in a corner. And my son, with his silence, allowed it. I wondered if I myself had ever provoked this. Maybe I was too available, always ready for everything. Maybe they confused love with obligation, as if my devotion was a duty and not a gift. It's easy to get used to your mother always being there. It's comfortable to use her as a crutch and forget her when you can walk on your own. That's what I thought, biting into a piece of the cake that was never served. The sugar tasted bitter, like the memory of something beautiful that has gone bad. I didn't dare talk about it with anyone. Not my sisters, not my neighbors, because I was ashamed. Ashamed to admit that I felt discarded, as if being rejected made me less worthy. I looked in the mirror and wondered if I still had a sparkle in my eyes, if my value had been lost somewhere along the way of so many surrenders, and the answer didn't come. I only saw wrinkles that told stories. Stories of sacrifices that nobody seems to want to hear. In my notebook, I kept writing. I put down angrily, I am more than a free babysitter. I put down with sadness, I am more than a wallet disguised as a mother. The letters seemed to scream truths at me that I had always hidden. It's hard to see yourself in those phrases as if they were broken mirrors, but it was necessary, because light seeps in through the cracks. And I needed a little light so I wouldn't sink. I was not willing to remain a shadow. The question, am I family or not, stayed with me even through Sunday service. The pastor spoke of forgiveness, and I barely listened. I only saw the families together in the pews, children hugging their mothers. I wondered if my son would ever see me that way again, or if I had already been relegated to the role of a decorative nuisance. I prayed with cold hands and dry lips, and I asked not to lose faith in myself, because my faith in them was beginning to crack. There was a moment when I almost dialed the phone to confront them. I almost told my daughter-in-law everything I was feeling, but I held back because I know that in her world, she is always right, and I didn't want to give them an excuse to paint me as the dramatic one. So I kept silent, as I have so many times. But this time, the silence was different, heavier, more conscious. It was the silence before a storm that was already brewing inside of me. Every object in my house seemed to remind me of my devotion. The stroller I bought because you were tight on money. The school backpacks I picked out with Valentina at the stationery store. The dresses I sewed with my own hands for her dance recitals. Everything was there, mute proof of my place in their lives. But none of it counted when it came to including me. It hurt as if they were tearing out my roots. And without roots, how does a tree remain standing? That night, I dreamed of my mother. She looked at me seriously, the way she did when she saw me making a mistake. In the dream, she told me, "Daughter, you are not a piece of furniture." I woke up sweating, my heart pounding against my ribs. It was as if she had slapped me with reality. I repeated those words to myself in the darkness of my room. You are not a piece of furniture. And with each repetition, I believed it a little more. The next day, the house felt different. I opened the curtains and let the sun stream in like never before. I turned on the radio and put on a song I've loved since I was young. I danced a little by myself, even with tears still in my eyes. It was my way of reminding myself that I am still alive. That even if they deny me, I do not disappear. That even if they close the door on me, I still have windows. And from one of those windows, I began to see the way out. But just when I was starting to feel a little strength, the phone rang again. My son, again, with that tone of urgency disguised as affection. I knew what was coming. Another favor, another request. And in that instant, I understood that the wound had not yet shown all its pain, because the worst had not yet arrived. I prepared myself to listen, although something inside me already wanted to scream. And that call was the beginning of my response. The table was set as always, with my embroidered tablecloth and the ceramic mugs I loved so much. The cake I had baked with such excitement was still intact, shiny with frosting, but with no one to taste it. I lit a small candle, not in celebration, but to give myself a little company. I served myself a piece of cake, and the fork clattered loudly against the plate in the silence. That silence enveloped me like a cold sheet, uncomfortable, impossible to ignore. I smiled to myself, pretending Valentina was there, blowing out candles with me. But the reality was a knife. I was alone at the tea party that never existed for me, and every bite was more bitter than the last. I sat up straight, as if someone were watching me, though no one was. The habit of always being accompanied made me feel ridiculous in my own living room. I remembered the times Valentina told me, "Grandma, you make the best cake in the world," and I thought that compliment was mine, all mine, even if her mother erased it from memory. The clock struck 9 o'clock at night, and their party must have been in full swing. I imagined the guests laughing, taking photos, toasting with sodas. I imagined my daughter-in-law showing off the decorations as if she had done it all herself. And here I was, with the candle blown out and the table empty. The silence was so heavy that I decided to speak aloud. I said, "Happy birthday, my love," as if Valentina could hear me from far away. The echo of my own voice surprised me. It sounded broken, old, tired. I felt my heart shrink like clothes forgotten in the dryer. I gripped the tablecloth in my hands until my knuckles turned white. I thought about calling, but pride tied my fingers. Why look for a place where I'm not wanted? I repeated that to myself over and over until I believed it. Then I opened my blue notebook, the one where I write what I don't dare to say. I wrote, "Silence screams louder than any word." And it was true, because at that empty table there were screams hidden in every corner. Screams that said they used me, they discarded me, they denied me. I didn't need to hear insults to feel the violence. The emptiness was enough. The hole they left in my life that night was enough. And as I wrote, tears fell onto the page, blurring some of the letters. But they didn't blur the truth that was already written. I poured myself a coffee, even though it was late, because coffee calms my nerves. I drank it slowly, looking into the cup as if the answer was at the bottom. There was no answer, only a dark, hot liquid that kept me awake. The neighbor's radio was playing happy music, and it made me angry. How can the world go on as usual when my life seems to be breaking? I wanted to scream, but I bit my lips so as not to wake anyone. I held that scream in my chest, where it hurt the most, and the silence returned to fill everything. I thought about my son, about the little boy who used to hug me tight, how he would run into my arms after school, sweaty and happy. That boy was gone. Now there was a man who stayed silent in the face of my humiliation. I wondered if I would ever see that boy in him again, or if I had already lost him forever in the noise of his marriage. That idea chilled me more than the silence itself, because losing a daughter-in-law is bearable, but losing a son hurts the soul. And I was beginning to feel that I was losing him, little by little. The cake was still there, intact, a witness to my abandonment. I looked at it, and it seemed to mock me, reminding me of my broken dreams. I took a knife and cut it into pieces, not to eat, but to vent my anger. Each cut was a complaint I didn't dare say aloud. This is for every night I stayed awake, I thought. This is for every morning I woke up early without a word of thanks. In the end, the cake lay destroyed on the plate, just like I was inside. And the silence was still there, watching, a cruel witness to my helplessness. I turned off the living room light, but the silence followed me to my room. I got into bed with the television on, just to hear something different. The anchors were talking about news that had nothing to do with me, but at least their voices filled the void. I closed my eyes and saw Valentina blowing out candles at a party without me. I saw my son laughing, as if no one was missing from the table. That vision drilled into my heart, and I swore to myself that I could not continue to accept so much contempt. At dawn, the silence woke me before the Sunday. The house was tidy, but I was a mess inside. I sat at the table, now without a tablecloth or plates, just the notebook. I wrote, "One day this silence will break." I didn't know how or when, but I felt it in my bones. Something was going to change because I couldn't take it anymore. That thought gave me a little strength to face the day, and it left me ready for the next battle that was on its way. When the phone rang and I heard my son's voice, I knew immediately it wasn't just any call. He spoke to me with that practiced sweetness that always appears when he needs something. He said, "Mom," drawing it out, just like when he was a boy and wanted to convince me to buy him candy. Only now he wasn't asking for candy, he was asking for money. He explained that the party had been more expensive than expected, that the rent, the school tuition, that everything had piled up. I listened in silence, feeling each word tighten in my chest. He didn't mention my absence from the celebration, nor did he apologize. He just asked me to save him again. The silence of my living room was filled with his anxious voice. I imagined him sitting there, scratching his head, waiting for me to say yes. "Only you can help us," he repeated, as if my hands were his only way out. And I remembered the untouched cake, the balloons I didn't see, the laughter I was denied. I thought of all the times I had been left without a cent just to give it to him, of every sacrifice, every small surrender I made without complaint. And it hurt me to see that there was no gratitude, only a habit of asking. It was as if my love had turned into an ATM machine. I bit my lips to keep from screaming. I wanted to say, "And what was the point of leaving me out of the party if I'm just going to pay for it anyway?" But I didn't. I didn't have enough strength yet. I just listened, with my heart burning and my throat tight. He kept talking, justifying, inventing reasons like a child caught in a lie. I knew they needed the money. I didn't doubt it. But I also knew that behind the need, there was abuse. And I was tired of giving without receiving respect. I asked him for time to think about it, and his tone changed. He no longer sounded sweet. He sounded impatient, as if my yes should be automatic. "It's just a loan, Mom. You know we'll pay you back," he assured me. A lie I knew by heart, because they never paid anything back. But I let him talk, let him believe he still had power over me. I hung up with a knot in my stomach, knowing that something had changed. I was not the same person I was before. No, something inside me was beginning to wake up. I sat on the sofa, looking out the window as if the answer were there. The afternoon sun came in warmly, but I felt cold. I opened my blue notebook and wrote, "Today I am not their savior. Today I am a woman." The words surprised me, as if they hadn't come from me. I realized that I was tired of being everyone's solution. That no one asked me how I was, only how much I could give. And in that equation, my dignity always came last. That thought ignited a spark in my heart. I remembered a scene from years ago. My son was 20 and wanted to buy an old, beat-up car. He asked me for money, and I gave it to him, even selling my mother's gold ring. He promised to pay me back in months, but he never did. Instead, he brought me a bouquet of flowers, saying, "The important thing is that I'm happy, right?" I smiled then, proud to see him happy, even though I was hurt. Today, I understood that gesture had set the dynamic forever. I gave, he received, and no one asked about my losses. I didn't sleep that night. I got up several times, walking barefoot through the house. The question wasn't if I could give him the money, because I could. The real question was if I wanted to. And the answer sounded clearer and clearer. No. I didn't want to keep feeding an ingratitude that was suffocating me. I didn't want to keep paying the price for his comfort. For the first time, my no was beginning to sound louder than my yes. My son's favor, disguised as an urgent request, became a mirror. A mirror that showed me everything I had put up with for years. Every sleepless night, every slight, every absence disguised as an excuse. That mirror hurt me, but it also opened my eyes. I could no longer pretend that nothing was wrong. My life had value, even if they didn't see it. And I was about to remind them of it, even if it hurt, even if it cost me losing them for a while. I sat on the bed and prayed quietly. I asked God for clarity, for strength, and for a little bit of courage. Because saying no had never been my role in this family. I was always the one who fixed things, who stayed quiet, who bent. But that night, between tears, I felt my mother was right. "You are not a piece of furniture." I was not a piece of furniture. I was not an ATM. I was not a shadow. I was Eleanor, a woman who deserved respect. When dawn broke, I looked in the mirror. My eyes were swollen, but something new shined in them. It was as if I recognized myself after being lost for a long time. I made coffee and drank it slowly, like someone savoring a decision. The phone was still on the table, silent, waiting for me to call. I knew he was counting on my quick response, as always. But I was in no hurry, because the answer was already clear in my heart. That favor, instead of tying me down, had awakened me. That morning, as the coffee steamed in my favorite cup, I began to travel back in time. The memories came flooding over me like an avalanche, impossible to stop. I saw myself younger, with my apron on and my hands full of flour, packing lunchboxes. My son sitting at the table, laughing while I rushed so he wouldn't be late for school. I was everything to him back then, nurse, teacher, cook, partner in crime, and now, hearing his voice only to ask me for money broke my soul. How can you erase so much devotion with a mom? I need a favor. Those words weighed more than any financial debt. I remembered entire nights I stayed awake by his bed when he had a fever, startled by every cough that shook him. I would recite prayers one after another, asking the Virgin Mary to watch over him. I'd put cold cloths on his forehead and hold him even when my back screamed in pain. I never thought about myself, only about him being okay. And today, it hurt that he didn't even remember those silent battles. It seemed as if all of that had been invisible, as if my love had been filed away in an unmarked drawer. I also saw myself running from one job to the next, taking on extra sewing work to pay for his college textbooks, selling desserts in the neighborhood, pretending I did it for pleasure, not out of necessity. He never knew how many times I came home with my feet bleeding from so much walking, and still I did it with pride, because I dreamed of seeing him succeed. I never wanted him to feel poor or limited. I wanted to give him everything, even what I never had. And maybe that was my mistake, giving him so much that he forgot the value of things. Every memory pricked my heart like an invisible needle. I remembered the day his father died and how I held him all night. I promised him I would always be there for him, that he would never be alone. And I kept that promise to the letter, even if it meant putting myself aside. Today, that promise felt like a chain, an eternal contract of sacrifice, a contract he used to his advantage, as if I owed him everything. But no, I didn't owe him anything. He was the one who owed me respect. I opened a drawer and took out old photos because I'm a masochist with my memories. I saw him in his uniform, with his diploma in hand, with a triumphant smile. And behind every photo was me, invisible but present. I was the one who ironed his clothes. I was the one who paid for his bus pass. I was the one who clapped the loudest. He shined, and I felt happy in his shadow. I never asked for applause, I never asked for credit, but I did expect that, at least, he wouldn't forget me. And that hope was breaking into pieces. His soft words hurt me more than a direct shout. Mom, only you can help me. And am I nothing more than that to him? The woman who solves things, who opens her wallet, who sacrifices herself in silence? His phrases sounded to me like chains wrapped in velvet. And every time he said, I promise you, I knew it was a lie repeated so many times I almost believed it. Those words weighed more than my daughter-in-law's silences because they came from my own son, from my own blood. I was left wondering if the blame was mine for not setting boundaries. I always told him the door to my house was open. I always welcomed him with a hot meal, a ready bed, and open arms. I never taught him to value my effort because I gave everything unconditionally. And now he believed that devotion was an obligation, not love. As if it were a duty I had to fulfill until my last day, that thought tore me apart inside. I felt used, more than loved. Words weigh more when they come from someone you raised. A criticism from a stranger hurts, yes, but it's forgotten. Contempt from a son burns like a slow fire that never goes out, because it touches you at the root in the most sacred thing you have. I felt that my son was talking to me like a client, not like a mother. And that distance, disguised as confidence, was killing me little by little. I asked myself, at what point did we stop speaking from the heart? At what point did I know that he needed me, but didn't want me near? I saw myself in the mirror, with tears falling without permission. My son's words resonated like an echo that wouldn't fade, and I thought that maybe the time had come to stop giving, to break that chain that I myself had forged with past promises. The memory of so many sacrifices filled me with anger and sadness. Anger for the injustice, sadness for the inevitable. I couldn't go back in time and change anything, but I could change what I did from now on. I put the photos away again, but something in me was no longer the same. It was as if looking at them had buried a part of me. I didn't want to continue being that invisible woman who lived on memories. I wanted to be seen, heard, respected, and I understood that this wouldn't come from them if I didn't demand it. Because respect isn't asked for with tears, It's earned with decisions. And I was about to make the hardest one of all, even if I didn't know how to say it yet. I fell asleep on the couch with the notebook in my lap. I woke up in the middle of the night, cold and with a restless mind. Half asleep, I wrote, "One day I will say, enough." That phrase stayed with me like a mantra as I went back to bed. I knew that day wasn't today, but it was close. I felt that every memory, every heavy word was pushing me toward it. I couldn't keep carrying so much pain without doing something, and I held on to that thought, ready for the next battle. The call came on a Thursday afternoon when the house was quiet. The phone vibrated on the table as if it knew it was bringing a blow. I saw my son's name on the screen and my heart sank. I answered with a calm voice, though inside I was shaking. "Mom? Are you busy?" he asked, as if he really cared. I replied no, that I could talk. Then, in the same old tone, disguised as affection, he dropped the expected line. "Mom, I need another favor." He mentioned nothing about the party, or the cake, or my absence. As if time had erased what happened, as if I had forgotten. He told me about overdue bills, an urgent payment, a missed opportunity. It was the same old script, repeated word for word. I listened in silence, but this time my silence was different. It wasn't resignation, it was analysis. As he spoke, I remembered every wound, every slight, and I felt that the glass was about to overflow. It hurt that he wasn't calling out of love, but out of need. It was as if I only existed to plug holes, as if my role as a mother was reduced to solving other people's problems. As he talked, I imagined him counting the bills he didn't have yet, and I asked myself, how many more times am I going to let him use me? I didn't want to interrupt him, but my patience was exhausted. Every word from him fell on me like a brick, and I couldn't carry that weight anymore. Then, something inside me broke. An unexpected strength pushed me to do what I had never done. I said, "Wait, son, let me speak now." A strange, heavy silence fell, as if he didn't understand my interruption. I took a deep breath and released what I had held in for years. "Do you know how I feel? I feel like you only look for me when you need something." The sentence came out firmly, though my voice was trembling, and on the other end, he was quiet for the first time. That silence gave me more courage than any word, because it was proof that I had surprised him. He never expected me to dare to confront him. I continued, without stopping, like a river breaking a dam. "You didn't call me on the day of your daughter's party. You didn't ask how I was. You didn't give me a place as a mother, or as a grandmother. And now you have the nerve to ask me for help. Do you really think that doesn't hurt?" My tears were falling, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of release. On the other end, I heard his short breath. He stammered, "Mom, it's not like that, you know." But I interrupted him again, with a firmness that even I didn't recognize. "Yes, it is, son. And I am tired." I surprised myself saying those words clear, hard, impossible to take back. It was as if my voice had been waiting decades for that moment. He tried to justify himself. He mentioned his wife, the pressure, the stress. But none of it erased the fact. I had been excluded and used. For the first time, I felt the power shift. I was no longer the mother who bowed her head. I was the woman reclaiming her place with dignity. And that feeling ran through my body like electricity. I no longer cared if he got angry, if he was offended, if he hung up. The important thing was that my voice was being heard, that I was hearing myself, and that was the real change. The call dragged on with uncomfortable silences and broken phrases. He tried to soften things, to promise, to convince. But every promise sounded hollow, like a door that won't close. I was no longer listening with the same naivety. Every word he said confirmed what I already knew. I had given too much, and he had gotten used to receiving without looking back. It was an old pain, but now it was wrapped in clarity, and that clarity was setting me free. When we finally hung up, I stared at the phone. I hadn't yelled, I hadn't insulted, I hadn't lost control, but I had said what I always kept silent. My hands were shaking, but I felt a strange peace. It was as if by speaking, I had opened a window in a closed room. The air came in fresh, clean, different. For the first time, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like the owner of my words. That night, I didn't cry like the nights before. I poured myself a glass of wine, something I hadn't done in years. I toasted alone, not out of sadness, but out of bravery. I said aloud, "Today, everything changed." Because that's how it felt, as if I had crossed an invisible line. There was no going back. I couldn't go back to being silent. The wound was still there, but now it was covered in dignity. And that was my first true gift to myself. I fell asleep late, my mind full of thoughts, but in the midst of it all, there was a new certainty. The call hadn't stolen my energy, it had given it back. I felt that my mother, from heaven, was applauding me in silence, and that God had given me that moment as a test of strength. I didn't know what would come next, or how my son would react, but I was sure of one thing. I was no longer the same. That call had changed everything. I hung up the phone with my heart racing, but something inside me was calm. I had uttered a no that had been saved up for years. A no that didn't sound like rejection, but like justice. I sat at the table with the notebook open in front of me. I wrote in large letters, "Today, I said no." And looking at it on the paper, I felt a shiver. As if I had signed a contract with my own dignity. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. That no was the beginning of something I had never been allowed. To choose for myself. When my son tried to call me back, I didn't answer. I let the phone ring until it stopped. I didn't want to hear excuses or promises I already knew. That silence was my way of reaffirming the decision. Meanwhile, inside me, a voice repeated, "You did it, Eleanor." It was the voice I had silenced for years, the one that always hid behind obedience. Now it spoke loudly, confidently, like a woman who recognizes herself. And I held on to that feeling, determined not to let it go. I thought about all the times I gave in, afraid he would pull away from me. How many times I opened my wallet, trembling, just so he would keep calling me. But I understood that this wasn't love. It was disguised manipulation. True love doesn't demand sacrifices that destroy you. True love doesn't erase you from a party and then look for you to pay for it. And although it hurt, I understood that if I wanted to regain my value, I had to start with myself. That no was more than a word. It was a rescue. It was my way of telling myself, enough is enough. That night, I slept with the window open, letting the fresh air in. I felt light, as if I had dropped a huge stone I had been carrying on my back. I didn't sleep deeply, but my thoughts were different. They were no longer of pain, but of clarity. I repeated to myself in silence, "I am a mother, yes, but I am also a woman." And that phrase gave me a new, unknown pride, as if my identity had been hidden under layers of sacrifice. And now, little by little, I was getting it back. The next morning, when the phone rang again, I left it on silent. I made breakfast just for myself, calmly, without rushing. Eggs, bacon, a muffin, and coffee. I set a beautiful place for myself at the table, as if I were a special guest in my own home. And as I ate, I thought about how ironic it was. I always gave the best of myself when it was for others, but now I was learning to give the best to myself. That breakfast was a small but symbolic act, a silent toast to my own bravery. Around noon, my son sent me a text. "Mom, I need you, please." I read it slowly, without replying. I felt tenderness for him, but also anger. He was a boy trapped in a man's body, used to me saving him. I knew that saying no might seem cruel to him, but in reality, it was the most loving thing I could do. Because only then would he learn that not everything in life is obtained through emotional blackmail. That was my true gift as a mother, teaching him boundaries. The tears came. Of course, they did. Saying no didn't turn me to stone. It made me human. It hurt to imagine him in trouble. It hurt to think he might be angry with me. But beneath that pain, there was a strength I had never felt. A strength that told me I was not alone. That God was with me. That every mother has the right to be respected, not used. I wiped my face with my hands and smiled. even though it hurt, because I knew this was the right path. I started cleaning out the closet and found the yellow dress I had bought for Valentina. I held it in my hands, a lump in my throat. I thought about giving it to her later, but on my terms, not theirs. That dress was no longer a symbol of rejection. It was a symbol of my true love, love that doesn't need a party to exist. I folded it carefully and put it away, promising myself I would give it to her one day. That day would be different, because I would no longer be silent. I would no longer be invisible. In the afternoon, a friend called to invite me for coffee. I accepted without thinking, and as we talked, I dared to tell her what had happened. She listened to me with wide, surprised eyes. "Eleanor, you are so brave," she told me with a smile. I didn't feel brave. I felt tired. But hearing those words gave me a sense of relief. It was confirmation that I was not wrong, that my no was not cruelty. It was dignity. I returned home at dusk, my heart lighter. I lit a candle and gave thanks for having the strength. I looked up at the sky and thought of my mother. I imagined her telling me, "You finally understand, daughter." And that idea brought a smile through my tears, because I understood that every generation carries its own battles. And mine, at that moment, was to learn to say no and mean it, even when it hurt. That night I wrote in my notebook, "Today I chose my peace. I don't know if I'll feel this strong tomorrow, but today I do. Today, I don't feel used. I don't feel like furniture. I don't feel like an ATM. Today, I feel like Eleanor, the woman who said no and did not crumble." That thought lulled me to sleep better than any lullaby. I fell asleep peacefully, my heart beating slowly, steadily. Like someone who knows they have finally taken the first step toward freedom, and although the journey was just beginning, I was no longer afraid to walk it. After hanging up and holding firm to my no, the tears didn't take long to arrive. I locked myself in my room and cried like a child, my face hidden in my hands. It wasn't a cry of weakness, it was a release built up over years. I cried for every dawn of sacrifice, for every disguised slight. I cried for the time they told me, "We already celebrated without you," as if it were nothing. I cried for the times I stayed silent just so I wouldn't lose them. It was a dammed-up river that was finally overflowing, and the more I cried, the lighter I felt. When I ran out of tears, I was surprised by the silence that remained. It was different from before. It was no longer empty or lonely. It was a silence that sounded like calm, like rest, like a deep breath. I looked in the mirror with my swollen eyes and managed a small smile. "You are alive," I told myself quietly, "and you are starting over." For the first time in a long time, my reflection didn't seem sad. I looked strong, though tired, like a warrior after a battle. And I liked recognizing myself that way. I decided to get up and clear the table where traces of the cake still remained. Every crumb I swept away was like a memory leaving. I washed the dishes, opened the windows, let the fresh air in. The house smelled clean, new, like a promise. I put on soft music, the songs I always put off listening to for lack of spirit. I walked barefoot on the cold floor and felt like the world belonged to me again. I didn't need anyone's party to celebrate my life. This was my small act of freedom. The next morning I woke up with a different energy. I threw open the curtains wide, and the sun filled my face. I poured myself a coffee, but this time I drank it on the balcony, looking at the sky. I remembered I had always dreamed of painting, and suddenly I knew. The time had come. Without a second thought, I signed up for a painting class at the local community center. I didn't do it to fill my time. I did it for me, only for me. It was a gift I had been putting off for years, and that day, as I signed the register, I felt like I was getting my life back. During the first class, my hands trembled as I held the brush. I felt clumsy, out of place, like a child starting something new. But little by little, the colors began to flow. The blank canvas became a mirror of my emotions. I painted a tree with strong roots and open branches. When I looked at it, I ended up crying again, but this time with emotion. That tree was me, being reborn, and painting became my refuge. Every afternoon, as I painted, I found myself laughing alone. I remembered painful moments, but they didn't hurt me in the same way. They were past stories that were turning into brushstrokes of color. The pain was transforming into art, the sadness into freedom. I began to reconnect with friends, to accept invitations I used to refuse. I started walking through the town square again, buying flowers for myself. It was as if I had been asleep and was finally waking up. That awakening hurt, yes, but it was also beautiful. In my heart, the wound from my family remained. I don't deny it. It still hurt to think of my granddaughter asking for me. The memory of the exclusion still burned. But I understood that life doesn't stop for those who don't value you. I had the right to smile even if they forgot me. I had the right to fill my days with colors, with friends, with faith. And little by little, I began to truly believe it. That was my greatest act of healing. One day, while I was painting in the workshop, a woman told me, "You have the hands of an artist. You can tell you paint with your soul." Her words made me blush, like a teenager. I had never thought of myself as anything more than a mother and a grandmother. But in that moment, I understood I still had so much to discover. It wasn't too late to reinvent myself. It's never too late. And that idea gave me new life. It gave me back the excitement to keep creating. The crying had emptied me, but it had also opened up space. Space for joy, for pride, for my own company. I understood that freedom doesn't come all at once. It comes little by little. Like drops filling a glass, like brushstrokes completing a painting, every day with a sustained no was another step toward my independence. And though I grieved what I was losing, I was strengthened by what I was gaining. Freedom was no longer an impossible dream, it was my new reality. That night, I lit a candle in front of the painting of the tree. I looked at it lovingly, as if looking at myself in its reflection. I thanked God for giving me the strength to cry and to carry on, for reminding me that there was still life inside me. I promised myself I would never again put myself at the bottom of my own list, never again stay silent out of fear, never again give up on myself, because I learned that freedom is also born from tears, and I was already beginning to live it. The days passed, and my silence began to carry weight in their house. I didn't call, I didn't write, I didn't offer my help anymore. I limited myself to my new life, my paintbrushes, my peace. But I knew my absence was not going unnoticed, because you can't replace a grandmother that easily, no matter how hard you try. Valentina, my little girl, started asking for me. A neighbor told me she heard her say aloud, "And my grandma?" And that echo reached my heart louder than any complaint. It hurt to imagine her looking for my face at the party. Maybe she wondered why I wasn't there with my camera. I was always the one who cheered the loudest at her school plays, the one who clapped until my hands were red. Now, surrounded by balloons and gifts, something must have felt missing. Because love doesn't hide, you notice when it's not there. That thought brought me sadness, but also a sense of justice. They felt my absence, even if they didn't say it. My daughter-in-law, I found out, tried to justify the situation. She said I was very busy or a little under the weather. Easy lies to disguise the contempt. I would hear these rumors and press my lips together. I didn't want to confront her yet, but I knew the truth would be heavy. The truth always finds a way to come to light, and that light was going to expose them. I didn't need to say anything. The echo was already ringing. My son started calling more often, though I didn't always answer. His tone wasn't so confident anymore. There was a nervousness in his voice. When he left messages, the discomfort was obvious. "Mom, Valentina is asking for you. When are you coming over?" Those words cut through me, but I held firm, because I didn't want to go back as if nothing had happened. If I was going to return, it had to be on my terms, not theirs. It was my way of teaching them that I too deserved respect. Meanwhile, I continued with my new routine. I took my painting classes, went for walks, bought myself flowers. I discovered that my life could be full without depending on them. But the echo of my absence continued to ring loudly in their house. It wasn't revenge, it was a consequence. The difference was noticeable. Where I used to be, there was now an emptiness. And they were beginning to understand it. Because no one fills the place of a mother who stands her ground. A neighbor mentioned that Valentina took a drawing to school. She had drawn a family with balloons, and off to the side, a grandmother with a smile. When the teacher asked, she said, My grandma didn't come, but she's always with me. Hearing that, I broke inside. Children speak truths that adults hide. And her innocence reminded me that my bond with her was stronger than any barrier. No one could tear me from her heart. That echo sustained me when nostalgia attacked. In the grocery store aisles, I also heard comments. How strange that the grandmother wasn't at the party, they'd say. Curious glances followed me, like whispers looking for answers. I walked with my head held high, even if it hurt inside, because I was not going to lower myself to give explanations. They knew what they had done. I didn't need to justify myself. The echo of my absence spoke for itself, without my voice, and it was louder than they imagined. My son insisted on seeing me one weekend. "Mom, come over for dinner. Valentina misses you." I bit my lip, because my heart wanted to run and hug her. But my mind told me to wait, not to fall into the same trap. It wasn't time to go back as if everything was fine. I had to maintain my distance until there was a real change. I couldn't teach them that my love could be bought with favors. I had to show them that my love deserved respect. That echo became a silent lesson for everyone. Valentina learned that her grandmother doesn't forget her. My son understood that I was no longer his automatic savior, and my daughter-in-law, though she wouldn't admit it, felt the void her contempt had left. Everyone was facing their own mirror, and I, for the first time, was not the one carrying all the weight. My absence was my loudest voice, and I had no intention of silencing it yet. In my solitude, there were moments of doubt. I wondered if I was being too harsh, if it was unfair to my granddaughter, who was not to blame for any of it, but I quickly remembered that this was the only way. If I went running back, everything would repeat itself, and I was tired of circles that never end. I wanted them to learn that my place was valuable, and the echo of my absence was the only way to teach them. At night, I would light a candle for Valentina. I prayed that she wouldn't forget me, that she would understand one day. I asked God to watch over her innocent heart, and to give me the patience to endure the wait. The silence in my house was no longer empty. It was resistance. Every day I didn't go was a step toward my freedom. Every tear held back was another brick in the wall of my dignity, and I held on to that so I wouldn't crumble. I knew that sooner or later they would seek me out with a different intention. It would no longer be just for money or favors. It would be because they truly felt my presence was missing. That day would come. I felt it in my heart. And when it came, I would be ready. I would no longer be the mother who runs to save them. I would be the woman who chooses how and when to be there, and that thought gave me the strength to remain firm. One afternoon while I was in my painting class, I felt my phone vibrate in my purse. I chose not to answer right away. I had already learned not to run for every call. When the class ended, I took it out and saw a text from my son. "Mom, Valentina misses you. Do you want to come over this weekend?" I stared at those words as if they were a strange miracle. There were no reproaches, no excuses, just an invitation. But I also knew it wasn't an innocent invitation. It was overdue. And I was no longer the same person I was before. I sat on a park bench with the message still open. The wind blew through my hair, and children played nearby. I thought of all the times I would have run happily to accept. How before, any gesture of attention made me forget the slights. But this time was different. This time, I had the power to decide. My heart urged me to hug my granddaughter immediately. My mind reminded me of the wound that was still bleeding. And between the two voices, I remained silent. I took a deep breath and reread the message over and over. It didn't say, "We need you." It said, "Valentina misses you." That detail hit me hard because it came from my granddaughter, not from them. She was innocent in all of this. She hadn't erased me from her party. She was also a victim of the distance they had created. And I didn't want her to think I had abandoned her. That thought filled me with both tenderness and strength. Because my love for her was greater than any pride, I decided not to reply immediately. I walked home slowly, letting the afternoon speak to me. The sky was painted orange, and it seemed to tell me, "It's your turn to choose." In the kitchen, I poured myself a coffee and sat down with my blue notebook. I wrote, It's not about going back to how things were. It's about going back differently. And that phrase lit me up inside. Because I understood that the key wasn't to say yes or no. The key was to decide from a place of dignity. The next day, I replied to the message calmly. Yes, I can come. But just for a little while, and I want to talk to you first, son. I typed those words slowly, with firmness. They weren't a favor, they were a condition. And when I sent it, I felt an immense relief, like someone breathing after being underwater for a long time. I wasn't running to them, I was walking at my own pace. For the first time, the decision was mine. And that changed everything. My son replied almost immediately. Of course, Mom, we'll talk here. I noticed his tone was softer, less demanding, as if he knew something had changed. He asked what time I would arrive, and I didn't answer right away. I decided I would do it my way, without rushing. I wanted them to understand that I no longer revolved around them, that if I went, it was because I chose to, not because they asked me to. That difference gave me a new pride, and it reminded me that there was no turning back. The weekend arrived, and I got dressed calmly, not with the hurry of before, not with the anxiety to fit in. I chose a navy blue dress and my favorite earrings. I looked in the mirror and saw someone different, upright, confident, with a sparkle in my eyes. I took the gift I still had saved for Valentina, the yellow dress. I wrapped it again, but with a different ribbon, as a symbol of a new beginning. That gift was no longer a sacrifice. It was an act of free love, and that made it even more valuable. When I arrived at the house, my son opened the door with a nervous smile. He hugged me, but I didn't rush to lose myself in his arms as I used to. I looked him in the eyes and said, "We need to talk." He nodded, and for the first time I saw him look serious, attentive. I walked into the living room and felt the weight of that place where I had been invisible so many times. But this time, I didn't feel small. I felt strong. The echo of my absence still floated in those walls. And now I was arriving with my renewed presence. Valentina ran to me yelling, "Grandma!" She hugged me so tight she nearly broke my ribs. Her eyes shined with excitement, and my heart melted. That hug reminded me that it was all worth it, that my granddaughter was my true connection to life. I gave her the gift, and she opened it happily, jumping for joy. Her laughter filled the house like music, and in that instant, I knew I was in the right place, but in a different role. After the hug, I sat at the table with my son. He looked at me nervously, as if expecting a scolding. I took a deep breath and said, "I am here because I want to be, not because you need me." He looked down and nodded in silence. I felt my words weighing on him, but also waking him up. There were no long reproaches, just a clear truth. And that truth opened the door to a new beginning. A beginning where I was no longer invisible. That night I returned home with a full heart, not because everything was fixed, but because I had made the choice. I had gone out of love, not obligation. I had hugged my granddaughter without losing myself, and that changed everything. I lit a candle and gave thanks for the lesson learned. Life had shown me that it's always the right time to set boundaries, and that a late invitation can become a new path. When I got home after that visit, I sat in silence in front of my blue notebook. I opened it to a new page and wrote in capital letters, "Enough." That word seemed to shout from the paper, like a reminder of my new path. I stared at it for a long time, as if reading it convinced me even more. It had been so hard to say it aloud, but so liberating at the same time. I understood that enough doesn't mean stopping loving. It means stopping the permission for abuse disguised as affection. And that was my greatest lesson. All my life, I thought being a good mother meant giving without limit. That love was demonstrated in silent sacrifices. But I understood that idea had only chained me. Being a mother also means teaching respect, even when it hurts. If I kept giving in, I was teaching my son that it was okay to use me. By saying enough, I forced him to look in a different mirror, a mirror that showed the consequences of his actions. And that was a more valuable gift than any money. The relationship with my son didn't get fixed overnight. There were silences, uncomfortable moments, heavy glances. But there were also small gestures that didn't exist before. A text to ask how I was, without asking for anything in return. A brief visit with Valentina, just to have coffee, a hug that lasted a little longer than usual. It wasn't perfect, but it was different. And that change, however small, was enough for me. What surprised me most was my granddaughter's reaction. She never held my absence against me. She just hugged me tighter when she saw me. In her innocence, she understood that I was still there, even if not always present. That taught me that children recognize true love without needing explanations. My bond with her was intact, solid as an old root, and that certainty gave me peace, because no matter what happened with the adults, she would always have me in her heart. That was my real place, and no one could take it away. Saying enough gave me back time for myself, time I had forgotten belonged to me. I started reading novels in the afternoons, going to the market without rushing, laughing with friends I thought were long gone. I realized my life didn't have to revolve around favors. It could also revolve around my own desires, my own wishes, and that revelation was like opening a window in a house that had been closed up for years. The fresh air of my freedom came in more every day. I also learned not to feel guilty for taking care of myself. For years, I thought saying no was selfish. Now I knew that saying no was an act of self-love, that it didn't make me less of a mother, but a more complete one. Because an empty heart cannot give healthy love, and I needed to fill mine with dignity and peace. It was a lesson that cost me tears, but it was worth every single one, because in the end, nobody respects someone who doesn't respect herself. There were moments when the loneliness was heavy. I won't deny it. Some nights I missed the noise of family in my house, but I learned to distinguish between real company and self-interested company. I prefer dignified silence over a presence that hurts me. And in that silence, I found a new kind of company. Myself. I discovered I was strong, capable, valuable, without needing approval. And that company was enough to keep me from crumbling. More than that, it became my refuge. Looking back, I understood that my whole life had been training. Every sacrifice, every tear, every slight had prepared me for this moment. It was as if everything had a purpose, to teach me to wake up. The pain became my teacher, and dignity was its lesson. I realized that it is never too late to say enough, that even at 63 years old, a woman can reinvent herself, that self-love has no age limit or expiration date, and that there is always time to start over. It took my son a while to fully understand, but little by little, he stopped asking me for money. And he began to look at me with a respect that didn't exist before. I didn't need him to apologize with words. I saw it in his actions, in how he listened to me more, in how he offered me help with small things. He wasn't the perfect son, but he was a man who was learning, and I felt satisfied to have pushed him to grow. Even though the price had been high, today, I can say that I am not the same woman I was before. I no longer live waiting for invitations, or begging for a place at other people's tables. I learned that my value isn't measured by what I give, but by who I am. That I deserve to be at the celebrations, yes, but not at any cost. That if they close the door on me, it doesn't mean I don't have a home. My home is myself, and there is always room for me there. That was the biggest lesson of all, the one that gave me my life back. Now, when I write in my blue notebook, I don't just write down pains. I also write down dreams, plans, ideas I use to keep in drawers. I write, I want to travel, I want to laugh more, I want to paint a large canvas. They are no longer just distant wishes, they are possible projects. Because by saying enough, I gave myself back the right to dream, and no one can take that right away from me. I am Eleanor, the woman who got tired of being silent, and what I learned by saying enough changed my destiny forever. I always introduced myself as so-and-so's mom or so-and-so's grandma. That title gave me pride, but it also slowly erased me. Because behind the mother and the grandmother, there was a woman nobody saw. A woman with dreams, with desires, with fatigue, and with dignity. It took me 63 years to raise my voice to remember that. Not just to my family, but to myself. Because I myself had forgotten who I was before I was everything to everyone else. And now I was getting her back. When I walk down the street, I no longer lower my gaze. I no longer feel invisible, even if my wrinkles speak of my age. On the contrary, I wear them with pride. They are proof that I lived, that I resisted. I don't need to disguise my gray hair, because my history lives in it. I am a grandmother, yes, but that doesn't make me any less of a woman. On the contrary, it gives me double the strength, double the experience. Because I learned to give love, but also to set boundaries. And that combination is my true wealth. Sometimes people think that a woman my age no longer has the right to decide, that she must accept what she's given, stay quiet, resign herself. I believed that too for a long time, until life forced me to wake up with a jolt. Now I know that dignity doesn't retire, and bravery has no expiration date. Every day is a new opportunity to lift my head, to remember that I am still alive, that I still have a voice, and I don't plan on silencing that voice ever again. With Valentina, I discovered that a grandmother's love doesn't depend on parties. It doesn't matter how many times they close the door on me, my place in her heart is untouchable. She reminds me that not all is lost, that there is always innocence to be rescued. When she hugs me, I feel that every sacrifice was worth it, but she also reminds me that I must be whole for her, that she needs a strong grandmother, not a broken one. And that's why I learned to take care of myself, to love myself, to respect myself. Because doing it for me is also doing it for her. I have learned to enjoy my solitude without feeling it as a punishment. I put on music, I light candles, I cook just for myself with the same care. I walk through the park, I look at the trees, I listen to my own breathing. Before, solitude weighed on me like a tombstone. Today, solitude is my ally, my safe space, my refuge. It's where I recognize myself, where I embrace myself unconditionally. Being a woman also means learning to be with yourself, and I, at last, have achieved it. When I look in the mirror, I no longer look for the sacrificed mother. I look for Eleanor, the woman who survived, who learned, who transformed. I speak to myself with tenderness, as no one ever spoke to me before. And I tell myself, you did well, even though you made mistakes, even though you suffered. That internal dialogue is my new strength. Because no one can give me peace if I don't give it to myself first. I am a woman before all else, and that doesn't take away from me. It completes me, and it gives me a pride that no one can snatch away. Today I understand that I don't need grand recognitions. I don't need medals or public thanks. What I need is respect, and I demand that every day with my actions. My son, little by little, has understood. My daughter-in-law feels it, too. They no longer seek me out as an ATM, but as a real mother. And although not everything is perfect, I am no longer the same. I am stronger, clearer, more aware of my value, and that changes everything. I am a grandmother, and that is a role that honors me. But I am also a woman, and that is a role that gives me dignity. I don't plan to choose between one or the other, because both define me. What I will never again accept is being invisible. The woman in me deserves to shine, even with wrinkles and years. She deserves to be heard, respected, embraced. Because my story didn't end with my sacrifices, my story is just being reborn. I like to think that every wrinkle is an invisible medal, that every gray hair is a lesson learned the hard way. I don't hide them anymore, I show them with pride. Because in them lies the map of my won battles. I am a woman marked by time, yes, but not defeated. On the contrary, more alive than ever. And I want the world to know it. Even though it's late, here I am. When I write in my blue notebook, I no longer write down only pains. I also write down dreams. To travel, to dance, to keep painting. I want to stop being the shadow in the photo and become my own light. And I know I can do it, because I already took the first step. By saying enough, I open the door to a new chapter, one where I am the protagonist of my own life. The grandmother and the woman coexist in me without competing, and together they give me a power I never knew I had. Today, I close my eyes and I hug myself tight. I think about the Eleanor who used to cry in silence, and I tell her, "You did it." I think about the Eleanor who now smiles with dignity, and I tell her, "Keep going. I am a grandmother, but I am also a woman. And in that balance, I found my true freedom. A freedom that no one gave me, that I had to conquer. It cost me tears, it cost me loneliness, it cost me bravery. But now I know it was worth it. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to leave your opinion in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from, and what part of this story made you reflect the most. Don't forget to give the video a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and above all, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, because we will keep telling real stories here, full of emotion, dignity, and surprises that you won't want to miss.